Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is K.R. Morgan and today I'll be doing a review of the Captive Prince series by C.S. Pacat. In this series there are 3 books: Captive Prince, Prince's Gambit, and King's Rising. I wanted to do a review of all 3 books at once rather than just talking about the first one because I feel like the first book alone doesn't capture the full essence of the series. I feel like the characters can be really easily misunderstood if you just read the first book. The books are a romance between 2 princes of warring countries. The first country is called Vere. Vere was definitely inspired by France, but it's really unique. It's not really like anything I've ever read before in a book. There was a lot of talk about sex and sex slavery, and they called them pets. The prince from Vere is called Prince Laurent. He is not yet of age to take the throne, so the throne has been temporarily given to the regent, who is Laurent's uncle. The other main country in the novel is called Achelous. The prince from Achelous is called Damon. Damon is overthrown essentially by his brother and sent to Vere as a slave, and he ends up being the slave of Prince Laurent. And the books start I won't say quite slow. They spend a lot of time setting up politics in the world and everything like that. They're definitely slow burn, so they don't just like jump right into bed with each other, even though it is a romance, so you know that will happen, but it doesn't happen right off the bat, and I really liked that because you got time to get to know the characters. I really loved the world that this book was set in. I think the author did a fantastic job making everything really real and vibrant. Especially the cultures of Vere and Achelous were not quite opposites, but they definitely contrasted each other in some really key ways, and that came across in the interactions between Laurent and Damon. And I really liked that. One thing that I thought was interesting about these books is that there was no major focus on religion. A lot of times in fantasy novels, a sort of fictional religion plays a huge role. And while I often really like that, and I think it's really interesting, I also enjoy the fact that it was mainly absent from these books because it was refreshing. So looking at the setting, I think it's important to look at how homosexuality was viewed in the 2 countries that are portrayed in this book. In neither country was homosexuality a problem, but homosexuality was viewed very differently. So in Vere, having a child before marriage was considered like totally taboo. Like homosexuality was therefore accepted because before you were married, your partner had to be someone of the same sex because you couldn't risk having a child. People who had heterosexual relationships outside of their marriage or before their marriage were looked down upon and considered very barbaric. But then in Achelous, homosexuality simply existed. It wasn't really for any particular reason. It was not a problem. The main character, Damon, is actually bisexual and talks a lot about how strange he finds it that the people in Vere pursue homosexuality because they don't like the idea of being heterosexual before marriage. So the relationship between Laurent and Damon is very slow to develop. And without giving away any spoilers, it takes a really long time for them to move into a romantic relationship. And, you know, as a reader, I originally found that frustrating. I kind of was just like, let's get to it right away, but you know what's gonna happen. In the end, I was really grateful that their relationship takes so long to build up because it makes it more genuine and more real, and you know the characters before they move into their relationship really well. So it helps you really identify with them and what they're going through in their relationship. So I loved each of the main characters. I really loved Laurent. He starts out at this sort of like evil, rude prince, and you're just kind of like, oh, this guy's awful. And the whole first book is kind of like that, and it's not until the second book really that you start seeing him more through Damon's eyes, and Damon starts to see him as someone who's more innovative and trustworthy. He can come across as being just evil and rude, but he's more cunning and resourceful than anyone. And if you look at it in the right light, it's really impressive. I also really loved the other main character, Damon, even though he was the total opposite of Laurent. He really believed in fighting the honest fight and doing what was right, and he was a really good warrior, and he was more physical, and Lawrence is more better with speaking and politics, and I really liked how they opposed each other. And Damon was just, I don't know, he had this kind of innocence about him in a way that Lawrence just didn't seem to have, which is odd because Damon is older and Damon is kind of seen more in certain ways, and Damon has been enslaved and betrayed by his family. So I did really like some of the side characters, but I will say the books are fairly short. There's 3 of them, and they're each about 300 pages, but that's with fairly big font and a lot of blank space. So there isn't a lot of time to develop side characters and side plots. I ended up not minding that. I really just cared about Lauren and Damon, and I don't know if everyone will feel the same way, but I didn't necessarily feel the need for another storyline besides theirs. C.S. Pacat is putting out short stories that deal with some of the side characters. There's already 2 that have come out. One is called Green But For a Season, and the other one is called The Summer Palace. One of them, The Summer Palace, is about Damon and Lawrence, but the other one is about 2 side characters. I really enjoyed reading that because it gave some insight into who these side characters were, which, like I said, we don't really get a lot of during the story. I'm a writer, so when I look at books, I really pay attention to how it's written. The writing style of these books was incredibly unique and definitely changed as the stories went on. So the first book and the first half of the second book were very kind of flowery and romantic, and the author used a lot of fanciful language. But by the time we reached the third book, the writing was very raw and emotional, and there wasn't really a lot of extra vocabulary or extra words. And I liked both these styles, and I think the author did a really good job of using different styles where they were meant to be used. The way the author wrote the 2 main characters, they don't really share a lot of their emotions. And in fact, in general, a lot of the characters don't really talk about their feelings or what they're thinking very often, which I know is part of the huge lesson in writing, to show and not tell. But sometimes it was a little too subtle, and I wasn't even quite sure what they were talking about. And I've read these books twice. So the fact that after a second reading, sometimes I was still a little unsure exactly what was being implied indicated to me, at least, that I would have preferred a little more to be explicitly stated. But that said, the writing style of the books, especially during the intimate scenes, was so incredibly raw and emotional, and it fit really well with the way sex between Damon and Lauren was supposed to be. I think the intimacy and rawness of their emotions came across incredibly well throughout the books without them really saying a lot. Lastly, I want to talk about who I recommend these books to. If you love fantasy and love reading fantasy, but have never read any erotica before, I would definitely recommend these books as your first sort of fantasy erotica novel, because the sex isn't gratuitous and it doesn't feel like showy or performed. I wouldn't say it's quite subtle because you know what's happening, but it's not incredibly explicit. It's really, really tasteful and really well done and really enjoyable without feeling forced. It lacks that sense of sort of like voyeurism and that sort of kind of, whoa, that's not going to fit, or like, you can't make your body do that a lot of erotica books have. If you've read erotica before and you're ready for anything, I would also still recommend these books because they're so different from anything else I've read. And when you're watching the intimacy between them, it's almost kind of painful because it's so private. So many books and graphic novels and like yaoi and anime, things like that, can include such horrible stereotypes about males and gay males. These books, however, were totally free of that, and I loved hearing the author interviewed about that because she was so non-biased. So they're a really good place to start if you haven't read anything like this before. The writing style that C.S. Pacat has is so unique. It's not wordy. She's very to the point. It's a very lean book. There's not a lot of extra words. And while, like I mentioned before, sometimes it can be a little too much, generally it makes the books so much more poetic and romantic and really fascinating. One thing I will say about these books is that you have to be aware of potential triggers. So there is mention of past sexual abuse and child abuse. Nothing is explicitly stated, but there's definitely talk of rape and, like I said, like sex with minors and things like that, which obviously are sensitive subjects, and I think the author treats them appropriately. She doesn't romanticize them at all. I mean, they're definitely described as being horrendous and inappropriate. I love these books, and I would recommend them to everyone. I think the characters are fantastic. I think the setting was totally unique, and the writing was phenomenal. It was very different from any other writing I've read. So for my next video, I will be reading the first chapter of the first book. I do this because a lot of people just like the sound of somebody reading a book. Or if you're not sure if you want to read them and you don't want to buy a copy, you can just listen to the first chapter and then decide how you feel. Thank you for watching my review. Let me know if you have any questions or comments just by commenting below. And yeah, thank you for stopping by. Keep your eyes peeled for future videos from me, and keep reading and keep loving. Bye.